Hello, everyone, and welcome to Staking Mondays. We are live. My name is Ken. I'm here with the CEO and co-founder of Staking Rewards, Merkel Schmiedel. And today we have with us Derek Yoo, the CEO and founder of Moonbeam, an Ethereum-compatible smart contract parachain on Polkadot. Welcome, guys. And Derek, let's get right into it. So what was your first experience in crypto, and how did you get started?
So pretty relevant to the session here. I actually started in the beginning of 2019 with PureStake, and we were doing infrastructure work, including staking and other kinds of infrastructure services around to start with Algorand, and then that led us into Polkadot. So I think this kind of experience with infrastructure informed some of what we then later designed into the system in Moonbeam.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek, and great to have you on the show here. Second, very short answer, just what projects in the crypto ecosystem are you currently most excited about?
So I think the thing that I'm most excited about are new cross-chain use cases. We've been primarily focused on DeFi, I would say, is a big part of what's happening on Moonbeam. But it's these teams that are taking advantage of these new general message passing systems to create multi-chain architectures. That's what I'm most interested in. I'm sure we'll probably get into that more in the long form questions later.
Absolutely. And if you had to pick one sector in crypto that you think will create the most upside surprise in the next 24 months, which would it be?
Yeah, I think, well, like I said, we're spending a lot of time in DeFi, so I think that's here to stay, and that's going to continue to evolve. The other area that we'll see a lot of movement in is in this in the gaming sector, the combination of NFTs and games, and using that as a vehicle to get to a broader audience. And so I'd say that those are really the two. I don't know if I'd call it surprising, but those are the two where I think have the most potential.
And who in the crypto industry do you admire or look up to the most, and why? A person. Yeah.
I think we look up to other L1s that we're kind of we want to be at the table with. We're just a new network now. I'd probably say Avalanche. Avalanche. I think they've done a pretty good job of balancing kind of community building with real tech, solving interesting problems, good blend of kind of computer science and then the more practical end of things, and kind of developing a good ecosystem. I would say that's someone that we look up to, or that I look up to.
Very cool. And why is staking important for token holders? And I guess what is your view about staking in general?
I think there's technical reasons why it's needed to secure proof of stake blockchains, and there's kind of these more technical reasons. But for me, I think it's about engagement, right? So these systems we work on, these protocols, are only as valuable as the community around them believes them to be, in some sense. And so I think this staking is just a way to engage people directly, with at the protocol level, is the most interesting thing to me. And it's this kind of act of actually doing something that gets people kind of with skin in the game and kind of really becoming a kind of a more entrenched part of the community around a project. So I think that's what I would cite as being the most interesting thing.
Definitely, that's a great point. And last very short question: what is an activity for you to relax from wild crypto markets?
I've always liked reading, reading novels, fiction, short stories. I don't have that much time for these kind of things these days, but before bed, I always try to get in, let's say, 30 minutes of reading at least a day to kind of think about something different, go to a different place, different set of characters.
Can you recommend a book for us really quick? What you're reading now, maybe? Yeah.
I guess I just read a nonfiction book about the sinking of the Lusitania, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Very cool, very cool. All right, Derek. So let me just give a quick summary for everyone about the topics we're going to go over today. So we're going to be talking about staking, of course. We're going to be talking about what makes Moonbeam unique on Polkadot. How does its sister network, Moonriver, work? Moonbeam's ecosystem. We're going to ask Derek to tell us about some native and multi-chain dApps in development. How will Polkadot and or Moonbeam offer superior scaling versus Ethereum? And then, of course, smart contracts on Moonbeam. So let's hop right into the long form questions now. And Derek, can you give users a very quick and basic overview of Moonbeam Moonriver and its relationship with Polkadot and the product market fit you see for Moonbeam and Polkadot, especially relative to Ethereum?
Yeah. So I would say that if my simple way to describe what Moonbeam is we are a smart contract platform that's been optimized for cross-chain scenarios. So has built-in cross-chain interoperability features. And so that's different. I think there's other smart contract chains that aim to let's just try to be the fastest, or let's try to, have, take like a BSC where there's a special relationship between centralized exchange and the chain. So for us, it's about these cross-chain scenarios. And that's then led to a lot of the decision making that's happened around the project. That's why we went to Polkadot as an ecosystem first, because they have a particular point of view on cross-chain interoperability, and we knew we could inherit from that. They had this substrate blockchain building framework that made it quite a bit easier for us to build Moonbeam, versus trying to do it from scratch or to do it some other way. That's what led us to building out an Ethereum compatible approach. So we've taken an approach where developers can use a lot of the tools and infrastructure that already exists that were made for Ethereum. That was a very deliberate choice as part of this vision of trying to be as interoperable as possible. And I think one of the things that just went live actually is on Polkadot, the interoperability technology on Polkadot just went live last week. So that's the XCM technology, which we're big believers in as one of the ways to create cross-chain use cases and dApps. And so I'd say that's kind of the high-level summary of what we're all about.
So if you're speaking about interoperability, that's primarily within the Polkadot ecosystem, or also outside of the Polkadot ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the way I see this these days is I use the term general message passing. So there's a category of technologies that all, I sometimes use the short word GMP, or general message passing solutions. And they have different domains or scopes, and they have different technical approaches. But the way I see it is that it's not just that there's going to be one or the other. There's going to be a coexistence of multiple of these, probably not a huge number, but at least some. And so we see it as that there are kind of special domains both in the Polkadot ecosystem and in the Cosmos ecosystem. So in Polkadot, you have something called XCM that is this very highly secure cross-chain general message passing system. And in Cosmos, they have IBC, which has a lot of similar properties. So those two domains have this special kind of engineered in ability to speak with other chains. But there's many chains that are outside of those two ecosystems. So you still need a way for developers to be able to send messages to other chains as well. And so that's where you see this kind of there's a new category of protocols that are looking to fill that gap. So folks like Axelar, Layer 0, Wormhole is in this category. There's a number of other protocols. So we're trying to integrate with as many of those as possible to give optionality to developers. And I think that this future world will likely have even apps using maybe even more than one of these, multiple of these message passing systems to connect different parts of their app together.
That's awesome. And so can you give us a brief overview of the dApp app ecosystem on Moonbeam? Is there are there certain apps already deployed, and maybe there are also some interesting staking use cases that you could talk about from those dApps?
Yeah, so just to give context for Moonbeam itself, our mainnet went live in January, so we're about 4 months, a little bit more beyond the mainnet launch. I would characterize the last 4 months as being largely about infrastructure deployments. So there's been a number of kind of once it's live, there's a number of different elements that need to be brought in. Our Etherscan integration, multi-sig. There's a bunch of kind of tools and other things that the project teams need. So that's been a big part of what this first period has been about, is deploying all these infrastructure elements. So despite that, I would say that in the Moonbeam ecosystem, there's probably upwards towards about 200 projects that have already deployed into the either the Moonriver or Moonbeam ecosystems. But we are just now kind of finishing off these infrastructure deployments. So one of the big ones being Chainlink is one of the big integrations that is coming up here shortly, which will be a big unlock for our DeFi. For a lot of the DeFi projects that are deploying. And so I characterize it as probably a majority of the use cases are DeFi oriented. So I mentioned that at the beginning that continues to be an area where we see a lot of teams and traction. I would say secondarily, it's in this like NFT gaming like area. There's a lot of grassroots teams. Some of the teams are small, but they're either building a game. Sometimes they're funding themselves with like a pre-sale of NFTs that are going to have utility in the game later. That's definitely a second area like that we're seeing. A number of different teams building on Moonbeam.
So are these primarily like teams who are like exclusively building on Moonbeam, or teams from other blockchains, like they already deployed the dApps on Ethereum or somewhere else, and now they're also building on Moonbeam, or what's that ratio like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that there definitely are some multi-chain teams, and the context for that is even early on in our as we were doing ecosystem development work, those were some of the first teams we went to. I think that Moonbeam occupies a bit of a special place where, just by virtue of the fact that we are on Polkadot and we're kind of known as the EVM of Polkadot. So for a lot of these cross-chain teams, they're pursuing what I would call an EVM targeted multi-chain deployment strategy, right? Where they started on mainnet, and then they're like, okay, well, let's just take our same code base and deploy it to Avalanche, to Polygon, and so I think it makes sense for teams like that want to get to Polkadot to work with us, because they can do one deployment onto Moonbeam, but then they still can access, via XCM, we have an ability to move any Polkadot-based assets like onto like our EVM as an ERC20. So it kind of is like that's a way for them to get a footprint like into Polkadot without using the same code base, but still able to kind of work with the assets there, particularly for DeFi protocols. So that was definitely the first. I would say we collaborated from the early days with Sushi and several other DeFi oriented like multi-chain teams. We have a Curve deployment on Moonbeam. But what I would say is that has shifted over time, where a lot of the newer teams now are native teams. So a lot of these gaming projects I mentioned, we have one project, XL Racers is another game that is just going live here shortly. They are native, as well as DeFi projects. So there's a team called Moonwell that is one of the is a native like DeFi team. I think that those are obviously extremely valuable to us when they're native. I think that the multi-chain teams have like the brand like awareness. They're obviously well known, so that's great, and that's helpful. I would say though that like the native teams, there's a bit of a special relationship there, where if they're building a community and they're kind of focused on Moonbeam itself, then we know a lot of their energy is going into just helping us like build the ecosystem in the community here versus multi-chain team that might be a little bit more spread, right, in terms of their attention across like multiple environments.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting to note. So over 200 apps or teams have already kind of deployed applications on Moonbeam in the past 4 months, which is absolutely incredible. It speaks volumes to the interoperability, the multi-chain features that you guys have. Now, just wondering, you mentioned interoperability and multi-chain being a big feature for Moonbeam, but what is it about Moonbeam outside of that for the staking solutions or dApps user experience that makes it better than other smart contract L1 blockchains like Avalanche, for example?
Yeah, well, I think it's like this like use of interoperability can kind of inform and improve the user experience for like any use case, and not only staking use cases. So I'll give an example of Lido, right? So there's a Lido deployment on Moonriver, and soon shortly to be on Moonbeam as well. And so the idea there is that Lido wanted to make a liquid staking derivative for DOT. Right, so you have this DOT asset. The Polkadot, like the main chain that houses DOT, does not have any smart contract functionality. And so the question is, okay, well, how do they go about making a liquid staking derivative like they have on other chains like ETH mainnet or other places? And so we linked up with them fairly early on, and the idea is that they have a dApp that's on Moonbeam that uses Ethereum like smart contracts to implement its logic, but they are using this XCM technology, this Polkadot XCM technology, so that from those smart contracts they can perform like remote calls to the relay chain to perform staking operations. And so you have basically the smart contracts on Moonbeam kind of remote controlling staking operations like on the relay chain. And so the interesting thing for me about this example is that it's, while pretty simple, there's only 2 chains. You're taking 2 chains that each are pretty specialized to their purpose. You have Moonbeam specializing in these smart contracts. You have the relay chain specializing in staking, governance, or certain specialized functions it has. But you're kind of combining functionality from the 2 chains into like one dApp, so there's like one user experience. And then even though it's the same Lido experience, which you may be familiar with, it's you just deposit and you get out the ST version of the asset. Then behind the scenes, you have this like kind of orchestration that's happening between like 2 different chains. And so for me, that's kind of like what the future is going to look like, is that you have this like multiple specialized chains in the background doing something, one user experience, and then it's like this thing where you're hiding the complexity from the user, right? The user still just has like the one-click button, but all these things are kind of happening behind the scenes. Like those are some key ideas I think that are really going to be important in the future, because right now, with multi-chain, sometimes things get like worse before they get better, right? So a lot of these teams that have done many deployments, then you're asking the user to even know more. They're like, you have a drop down and you have to figure out, okay, well, which chain am I on? Like, what am I doing? Where do I need to move? Like what? And I think that's like a big inhibitor right now for adoption, right? This kind of like loading on like all this knowledge that the end user has to have. And so, I think that's one of the big unlocks with, this cross-chain interoperability. I think one is to simplify the user experience, and the second one is around allowing for chains to specialize in certain things. Because if you can specialize and combine those specialized things together, you'll get like a whole is greater than some of its parts, versus everyone trying to kind of be like minimally okay at everything. That's typically the case today.
So in terms of adoption and traction, like what are some of the metrics that you are looking at? Like user numbers, transaction value, and do you have anything special that you're always tracking?
Yeah, for us, it's really first and foremost, it's always about the teams, and the number of deployments. That's why I was pretty quick with like some of those numbers. There's this, this third-party website, Downtown Moonbeam, dtmb.xyz, that someone put together that actually like lists out all these like these projects. And so that's, when you look at just how we're organized internally, it's always about thinking of the development team as the customer, right? And it seems weird to use the word customer. Protocols aren't meant to use that, but I like using that term to get people in the right mindset that like, yeah, we're trying to do everything we can to serve these development teams, support them from a technical perspective, make sure that they have all the right tools and everything they need. So that's how we measure success, is how many great teams do we have that are deploying and producing kind of activity on the chain. And so we have other metrics like transactions, other things. I think we've had probably 25 million transactions or something across the networks since we launched. But it's really this teams and how many of those teams are deployed and kind of what the size of the ecosystem is. That's very important to us.
Yeah, and 25 million transactions, that's massive. And congratulations in a 4-month time window to achieve that number to this point. But wondering now, what differentiates Moonbeam from other multi-chain solutions that exist on Polkadot or other chain-of-chain smart contracts platforms? What would be this differentiation factor?
Yeah, I think that one of the things, obviously, is our focus on this, like focus on the Ethereum developer tools. I would say that is, was part of our kind of product strategy, and I think it's actually worked out pretty well. I'm of the opinion that it's easy. I think when you just have your engineering hat on, it's easy to say, oh, well, there's these shortcomings of these tools, and like, we can make like a better version that's like faster, that's, better in a number of different ways. But I think it's actually turns out to be quite difficult to push like a new tech stack. It's pretty hard. And I think people underestimate what that looks like a lot of times. And that's why, the EVM chains are so dominant now, is it's really because of this, like all these like tools and infrastructure around the system. And so I think for us, even though we had this broader like cross-chain vision, we said, the decision was like, let's like basically bridge, like make sure that like all of these Ethereum tools can be used, but extend like the base Ethereum feature set with these cross-chain integrations. I think that was kind of the key idea. And so, what form does that take? Well, to be specific, like a lot of the integrations we have come in the form of precompiles. So these are precompiled contracts that allow you to access advanced functionality. But it's done in that way so that they look like smart contracts, right, to like any other contracts that are deployed in the EVM. And that means that, you don't break compatibilities. You can use all the same tools. You go through these precompiles then to, we have these XC20s, which are these movable tokens, and we have, the Lido integration I described before. There's for remote contract for remote calls. That's how we're doing it in a way that maintains compatibility with these existing tools, but also, gives developers reach, I guess, to reach out to other chains.
Cool. So how much does it cost to place a transaction on Moonbeam today? And how would that look at like hyperscale compared to like other layer ones in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I would say that the fees now are probably in the 1 to 2 cent range, so relatively inexpensive. Of course, with like any EVM model, like it will move to a fee market like once like the blocks are full. So that's just a fact of like how like the EVM works. And so I think the question of like what does the longer term scaling strategy look like? First of all, I would say that it's around being able to offload like work from the main EVM to like other places. So I mentioned before like other specialized chains. We're actually quite excited about this like para-thread technology that's going to be released by Parity this year. So what that allows is you can basically create like snippets of substrate based logic, so kind of like blockchain logic that you can run on demand. And so we'll be able to connect like smart contracts on Moonbeam to these like snippets of like blockchain logic, so you can kind of offload like part of the work that you need to do to these para threads. I think that's an example of like how we see things scaling is by not trying to run everything in the EVM, you're kind of calling out and leveraging like other systems to run parts of like the workload of your application. And then on the longer run, like we do have a vision to have the ability for developers to have dedicated like EVMs if they want. We do see that on certain use cases, like for example, like large scale gaming use cases, that's likely like what makes sense. And I think the benefit of the approach that we're taking for this will be that it'll have the same interoperability characteristics that our main Moonbeam does once we have that solution.
Yeah, definitely very novel solutions. I haven't really heard some of those introduced yet in terms of how to scale a substrate-based chain. So do you see Moonbeam specializing in any particular niche use case? For example, Avalanche has made a big push into Web3 gaming. Solana has been very trading focused. What sorts of smart contracts or activities do you think are most suited for Moonbeam?
Yeah, I think that what I see right now is, again, teams are starting to like understand, what's possible with these new general message passing techniques, and it is still the case that DeFi like is a dominant like use case like on our chain, and so what I see right now is a number of new teams building that. All right, frankly, a lot of them are almost taking existing DeFi ideas from DeFi 1.0, but then making them natively like cross chain. And so you can have it takes something like there's one team we're working with that has a lending and borrowing like protocol. And so instead of having an idea where the smart contracts are just in one chain and you bridge assets in, instead they have the idea of having like all of these branch locations basically. So you have like a kind of a brain, and then you have these branch locations on all the remote chains. And then the idea is that you're connected like this whole system together with general messages. If a user deposits like on a given chain, you'd actually don't move the asset like back to the center. You leave it there, but then the fact that the deposit happened gets sent back as a message to the center, and then the center has this kind of accounting system of kind of like what debits and credits have happened like in the system. And so you can see it's kind of maybe the effect will be similar where it's like you're either lending or borrowing assets, but the architecture is quite a bit different. And I think it again it goes back to there's certain problems you can solve by taking an approach like this, because I think to step back, like in the past, when you build this, you'd either have the choice of deploying your contracts in one place and getting people to bridge in to like put the assets next to the contracts, or you take the approach of, okay, I'm going to make copies of my protocol like on all the different chains. But then the problem is that like it's not only a user experience thing, but you have this like fragmented liquidity where like you just have separate pools on all the chains. So I see this next wave of trying to like simultaneously solve like both those challenges. So you have kind of it feels like one system you're interacting with, even though it's like present on multiple chains. So it's almost like, I guess, your bank. You go to like the local branch office, you can perform some operations locally there, but it's part of this like larger system. And so, yeah, I think that, that kind of use case, I think in being able to power these new architectures in DeFi, that's definitely an area where we're seeing traction. And then also, like, though, on the NFT side, I think that some of these same ideas apply to NFTs, right? Where using general messages, you can have a consolidated marketplace, let's say, right, that has NFTs listed for many chains. You're able to provide a good user experience by putting them all in one place. And then when the user is clicking to buy, actually behind the scenes, a message is being sent along with a value transfer to then execute like the purchase like on a remote chain. So I think these are all, we're at the beginning of allowing developers to explore what they can do with this. But I'm pretty bullish on, just on these kinds of different like message passing enabled scenarios to create multi-chain architectures.
I'm actually sorry, just quick comment on fragmented liquidity on DEXs, for instance. To be able to unify that with a messaging system like you're mentioning, I think it's going to bring the next wave of liquidity depth into these markets that should definitely benefit users from their perspective and traders as well. This is something that I would almost compare to how different routes in a traditional order book for like an equity, for instance, there's different routes on the same price. Is that kind of how you envision a DEX that has consolidated liquidity across networks operating, where you have the same price tier or an order book, call it an order book DEX? How do you envision this architecture looking like?
Yeah, it's a little, I've seen different teams with different ideas about how to construct things. So I would say that the verdict is still out on like what form is correct. But I will tell you, there's some things that like I am seeing some common patterns. So like one pattern, for example, is when you have like the need to execute like a cross-chain like value, like like a swap, let's say, what a lot of these messaging patterns look like then is that you let's say you're starting on one chain, you're encoding the intent to do a swap like in a message, but then you're also transferring like value at the same time to like the remote destination, and you realize that the value transfer can be like consolidated to a single asset, right? So along with the messaging protocol, you might say, okay, let's just use USDC as the value routing asset. And so then you basically like have a thing where, let's say you almost price everything in USDC, you send a message out along with USDC to like the remote chain to execute some action. But then at the remote chain, if you need some other asset, it'll get swapped like on the remote chain behind the scenes to the correct asset to like perform the action. And so that's a pattern I see where I think a lot of cross-chain actions will consolidate down to like single or very few like value transfer like assets, and then like get kind of exchanged like right before the point of action, like on like the remote chain to whatever they need to be. And a lot of the general message passing systems are kind of incorporating that idea and partnering with these like liquidity routing protocols to try to facilitate this. That's kind of some of the stuff I'm seeing now.
Do you see any other like underexplored smart contract use cases? Or maybe you even have some data suggesting in one way or the other, like outside of DeFi and NFTs, and anything that you think could like be like the next big thing for smart contracts?
I think that yeah, for me, for us, like it really is probably into those two use case areas is where like we see most of the teams building, and it's a big enough idea to try to reimagine, what could be possible using these general messages. So I don't know that I'm the right person to ask about like other, kind of as yet undiscovered use cases, where I see us more as, trying to facilitate this change in thinking around some of the existing use cases that have traction. Because I do think that what I'm starting to realize is that there's a certain like mental model that's used now that is it's almost like it's the paradigm, right, that people operate in, which is like this idea that the assets like have to be at the same place as the logic. And so that idea is ingrained in like everything. It's not only how developers create things, but also in how users like are used to interacting with things. Like, I have to bridge over here to like put my assets next to the thing. And I think these general messages break that like assumption, but it's still like, there still needs to be time for like the imagination of like everyone to catch up to say, okay, well, now that assumption is no longer true, like what other forms like are possible. And so I see that as our main mission, is to kind of help facilitate like that thinking and make an environment where those ideas can be expressed. But yeah, I would say that it is really in like this like NFT and gaming and DeFi seem to be the areas where we're seeing most of the teams trying to explore that new design space. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Can you give us a sense how much of an improvement it would be like for any project like building in the DeFi NFT space, like in terms of smart contract execution from like Moonbeam versus Ethereum, for example? Like we had one of our team members, like they recently try to like execute a smart contract on Centrifuge, which is on Ethereum, but I think they're moving to Polkadot. And that would probably be like costing around like $2,500 to $3,000 on Ethereum to deploy like default like 15 contracts. Like how would that look like on Moonbeam, for example?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting example there because, I know Lucas, we know that team well. They are in the process of moving to be a parachain, and we are going to collaborate with them for a lot of the use cases. The same kind of integrations that they have for Ethereum mainnet would be, moved or would be kind of pointed at Moonbeam for the Polkadot like version. And we're able to use, since we're both Polkadot parachains, we can use XCM, which is it's kind of the I'd call it the gold standard in terms of security when you have this like engineered in messaging capability like you have with IBC and with XCM. And in terms of cost, obviously the cost would be much less for that smart contract execution. But I do think it is back to this idea of, you have a single app that spans like multiple chains, and you can create like an effect where the whole is greater than some of its parts. So I think in the Centrifuge system, you have a few different roles, right? You have the people kind of creating, like the creators, and then you have the folks that are kind of consuming like the created like real world assets. And so if the creation part is happening on Centrifuge, this like consumption part, Moonbeam makes for like a good environment for that, because we have there's other protocols there that they can compose with, and for some of the unique requirements they have, XCM will be used to basically ensure that there's these whitelists and these other kind of special requirements that they have that we'll be meeting using this Polkadot's XCM technology.
Okay, Derek. So what does the world look like a decade from now in which what you're doing here is wildly successful?
Yeah, I think that again, it kind of goes back to this like thinking where now, people have this like single chain mindset where they're like, okay, like I'm a developer. Let me pick a chain. Let me deploy a set of logic to that like one chain. It reminds me of like the early days of compute, where computers were super expensive too, right? And you said, okay, like I'm gonna deploy to this, this particular platform or this particular computer, and maybe I'm gonna, that's like this like huge decision I have to make, and then I'm kind of living like alongside these other apps. But you see how like the history of computing evolved, where like the computers got like a lot cheaper, right, and a lot more specialized to different functions. So I see something similar happening with blockchains, where you already have these like blockchain building frameworks already like have lowered the cost to make a new blockchain a lot. And so I kind of see like lots of specialized chains, and we're infrastructure people, so I see in particular I'm interested in like infrastructure chains of different kinds. So that could be smart contracts. Moonbeam I think is kind of like compute, maybe if you think of a cloud analogy, it's like a basic compute service. But I can envision a lot of other specialized infrastructure chains, so ones that specialize in storage or identity or message routing, kind of similar to if you're a developer, you go to AWS, you have this whole menu of different services you can use as building blocks. So that's kind of my vision, is that you'll have something similar to AWS as a developer, but instead of a centralized service, you'll have all these decentralized like services, specialized blockchains you can pick from. And then when you're constructing your app, you'll pick and choose like which services you want to use, and then construct a multi-chain app leveraging all those specialized services. But again, like this end user experience can be simplified quite a bit, where the end user doesn't need to understand, just like in the real world, the users don't need to understand all the different AWS services that are involved with the mobile app they're using. That kind of gets hidden from the user. And then you're able to present like a simplified user interface to users that still allows them to retain their keys and control, but is then powered by this this specialized set of multi-chain infrastructure behind. And so I think that's the kind of vision we're trying to be an important element maybe of that story, and that's kind of the vision that I have.
Awesome. And like how are you gonna get there? So like what's your go-to market, and like what's the incentives for developers? And maybe we can make it two questions. Like what are the incentives for developers to start building on Moonbeam, and then also what are the incentives for users to start using Moonbeam more for like their DeFi use cases and NFTs and so on?
Yeah, so we do have, as I mentioned, we already have a number of teams that have already deployed. So there's already a growing ecosystem there. I think we're known as a place to go that has a very strong community. It definitely has a more grassroots feel. I mean, we didn't go our project didn't go and raise like huge amounts of money, but it has more of this, like, let's call it like grassroots, like builder like feel to it. That being said, there is a Moonbeam Foundation that does have a grants program that's quite active. So we have many different grant applicants like every week coming in, and we're looking to support as many high quality teams as we can to build. So I would in particular say teams that are interested in this exploring this like native cross chain functionality, that's really something that we're trying to focus in on and is really driving a lot of our development efforts. And there's certain problems that come up like that when you are focusing on a certain area. Like to give an example, one of the problems we're seeing now is that you have fee markets, right? So you have fee markets that were designed largely for a single chain environment. That becomes a lot more complicated when you have a multi-chain, because you'll have like a fee that's charged on the local chain that you're on, and then you might have like a fee also on like the remote chain where something's happening. And so you realize that even the whole concept of how fee markets work may need to evolve basically to take into account this, like you might even have more than two chains involved in your interaction. So what does a fee look like where there's some interaction going across 3 or 4 chains? And so these are the kinds of problems that we're looking to kind of be to solve and to make ourselves the best place for these multi-chain use cases. But yeah, grants program, I mean, we're obviously very happy to speak with any teams that are looking to build and help support them technically and in other ways.
That's amazing. So for everyone listening, make sure to reach out to Derek if you consider building on Moonbeam. And also, like, if you have any questions here, just drop it in the chat. We will address it after the last question here. So I'm just very interested, Derek, like you also like founder of PureStake, and like what's the role of staking in Moonbeam? Like you already mentioned that like it's definitely a way of engaging users as well. And obviously it's also supporting the security of the network. Like, do you see more use cases for staking within the Moonbeam network, like natively or like as like smart contracts on the chain?
Yeah. So we spent time developing a staking system on Moonbeam that had a lot of the properties that we felt were important. Some of that was informed by our own work, like providing validators for proof of stake networks. So I think we came at this with a fairly practical mindset. In Polkadot, it's a little bit unique in the sense that as one of these parachains, you actually get part of your security comes from almost renting time from these relay chain validators, the validators that are on the relay chain. But there is this role of collator that we have on Moonbeam that is basically the folks responsible for the liveness of the chain and for the censorship resistance like of the chain, basically. So they're the ones who are collecting transactions and putting them into blocks. We felt pretty strongly that having a decentralized system for these collators is important, even if like ultimately security is being kind of like verified by the relay chain validators. These collators, they're in a very unique position where they are the ones who are deciding like which transactions go in or don't go into a block, and also like in what order they're in. And there's a whole kind of a lot of literature these days on MEV and kind of what that means for chains. So I do think that this is a very important kind of element to a system to maintain its like censorship resistance properties. So we wanted to make sure that there was kind of an open and permissionless system where folks could come in to serve this role of being a collator. That's where the staking on Moonbeam comes in. I think some of the design goals we had. So there are some interesting things here where you kind of have a plan, and sometimes things like surprise you. So one of the things that we felt strongly about was that as a participant in other proof of stake networks, we saw this kind of race to the bottom idea, right? Where basically like, if you are able to set a variable fee as a staker, like on a network, then, there's always someone who's willing to come in at zero or kind of help subsidize it to try to like get market share. But it's like very hard for like a small team to run, to bootstrap themselves or to like have a sustainable business in that way, right? So you kind of have this thing where the fees kind of go to nothing, and then the revenue for like the staking providers like goes shrinks basically, and then that like sometimes that even forces out the small people in a consolidation to like the bigger players. So to that end, we we did put like a fixed like amount of rewards going to anyone who's providing the collation service, like on our chain, was providing one of these nodes, saying that like if you can assemble the support to get in, with an appropriate amount of stake, that you would get a fixed reward for occupying one of those slots. Now, I think the interesting thing that happens though is that you realize that where there's a will, there's a way in the market. So as it's become competitive to get one of these slots, what we've seen is that some of the collators on our chain then are basically offering up some of that fixed reward back to their stakers to basically as extra incentive to stake with them. So you realize it's kind of one of these things where you try something and then the market finds a way to around you. And so that's happening a bit, but I still think the community that we have around us appreciates that some of the thinking that we put into our staking system to make it sustainable. And I think now we have a pretty healthy a whole kind of ecosystem of these validators or collators that are helping us with block production. And when you compare against for example, you take the state of most L2s these days that have a similar role, where there's a role for someone to package transactions into blocks and kind of put them on the network. It's often just the team running it. There's just one, right? So I think that we're in better shape from that regard, having many of these in a permissionless system where anyone can come in and perform this block production service.
Awesome. Yeah, that's definitely a great way. And obviously it's nothing you can prevent, even with limiting the number of tokens staked in one validator and so on. There's always ways around it from the markets, but at least it's going in the right direction, I think, and it makes it easy, harder for the market to game the system. So I do think it's a very good innovation, having fixed rewards for validators, for example. So moving into the community questions here. First question we have from Jamie, how important is the success of Polkadot for the success of Moonbeam?
That's a good question. I see our role as as that we can actually play an important role for actually all of Polkadot, in the sense that what Moonbeam is I see it as kind of the on-ramp, or kind of the place that's kind of familiar to people. So even from a dev perspective, you can use the familiar tools. From a user perspective, you're using MetaMask, so that's maybe something familiar that you already have. So we can kind of serve this function of drawing new developers and users in. But then once they're on Moonbeam, then you start asking questions. Say, oh, look, there's these integrations to these other chains, and what are these other chains, and what is Polkadot, and how does it work? And so we see a bit of our role as being this on ramp to Polkadot. And one thing I would say that is that this underlying technology of Polkadot, Substrate, and like I mentioned, these parathreads and some of these other things, really has been thought through to an extreme level of detail, and is quite good. And I think the market right now actually underappreciates a lot of the technical thinking, infrastructure, and work that's gone into this. And it's all part of a larger cycle of I guess the market educating itself about what these cross-chain technologies look like, right? Because I think we're kind of leaving the first phase was just you ape across anything, and then I think now people have gotten burned a few times and they're starting to get a little bit more educated. And I think that ultimately it's kind of going to become clear that there's different kind of cross-chain connections that have different kinds of security properties and are better or worse for different use cases. And so there'll be a better understanding of that. And that's kind of why we originally chose to go down the path to Polkadot, and we still are quite convicted on that.
Excellent. And next question here from the community is from Benedict, who's a massive Moonbeam supporter and Polkadot ecosystem supporter. And his question is, how does technology like Chainlinks CCIP fit into your concept?
Yeah, I think we have an idea that we are not trying to compete or push any one interop technology, although we obviously are uniquely positioned to provide XCM, Polkadot's interoperability technology to developers. We do not see this as a winner take all situation. And so we are integrating with as many of these general message passing solutions as we can. We have been doing quite a bit of work with the team at Axelar, who has a a quite excellent solution from my perspective. We also work with a team at Nomad. dBridge is another team which is in the process of deploying. So we have a number of different irons in the fire there, and we ultimately want to be home and provide as much optionality to developers as possible. So we want to integrate with as many of these general message passing solutions as possible. And I think actually for certain kinds of use cases, it may be the case that more than one will be used, right? So just like for certain critical apps, you might have like two like network connections, like, in case one goes down, like you use the other one. There might be something similar here where, you may actually have apps that integrate like more than one message passing system to ensure availability, to ensure reliability, to do cross-checking to make sure that you get the same answer both ways. And so that's kind of our strategy. So CCIP would fall like into this category where it's probably not going to be available until next year. But Chainlink is obviously an important partner of ours that we've been working closely with. So we would look forward to supporting that as well.
Cool. And we have another question here, like which projects do you see as competing with Moonbeam? Is it like, do you see yourself competing with Ethereum or like other smart contract platforms, or like how do you see that? Yeah.
So I think that if you just, some people say, oh, well, Moonbeam is just like the EVM of Polkadot, right? So I think if you have that framing, like, sure, then like I think, almost competing with like all other like smart contract platforms in some sense. But really we're really trying to specialize in these like cross-chain use cases. And so I think for that, like there is much less, in the way of competition. It's much more kind of specialized. And so that's, and that's the way I think about it, is that, look, we're just trying to be the best place for developers to deploy these like native cross-chain use cases. And yes, we have an EVM also. So of course that means that there's all the things that happen when you have an EVM are also happening, which in some ways is helpful even to the people pursuing these cross-chain use cases, right? To have AMMs and stable swaps and all of the kind of these things that are kind of part of the EVM infrastructure in a way, or a deployed ecosystem. But for us, I think the success will hinge on like these cross-chain use cases, and that's our bet, right? Our bet is that we're at a moment where we're at the beginning of this shift where things are going to shift into this way, and then my personal belief is there's going to be like winners and losers then, right? There's going to be people who can adapt to shifting into this like native multi-chain kind of thinking, and people that can't. And I think there might be some people that are big now in this like more single chain mindset that maybe don't either do or don't make this like transition over. So that's kind of the bet we're making.
Seems like a good bet to take. And last community question here comes from Rough Lace. And how are you guys going to get market adoption?
Yeah, it's a multi-prong approach. I would say that we've been, from my perspective, pretty successful on this to date. Some of that is from I do have previous experience building companies just in the Web 2 space. So I think that's actually a bit unusual almost, I'd say, for Web 3 projects. And so a lot of the things I learned from that experience were around marketing, go to market, having a BD team, tracking kind of like KPIs and performance like of those teams. So a lot of this is kind of nuts and bolts, growth oriented things that I learned from having this like Web 2 company. But a lot of those ideas I think are applicable in Web 3. So I think that's a large part of how we've even without raising these like large amounts of money, we've been able to be pretty successful, and we plan to continue expanding on those efforts. And even if there's like now we're at a moment in the market where it seems like things may be a little less like hot than they were in the past, we've done pretty good planning for this and have like a large amount of runway. And I think that actually can be advantageous to us, right? So as like maybe other people like don't have as much funding or other things, like we can kind of like chug along here and execute on helping support these teams. So I actually think that it makes me I think that we can use this to our advantage.
And thank you for providing those insights there. Derek, it's been absolutely amazing having you on today's episode of Staking Mondays. And where can our community go to follow you in the latest developments of Moonbeam and Moonriver and whatever else you're working on too?
Yeah, no, it's Moonbeam, whatever, 16 hours a day, whatever it is now. So that's the thing. But yeah, Just for myself on Twitter, it's just my name, so it's at Derek Yoo, DEREKYOO. But for the project itself, I would say the website's probably the best place. So that's moonbeam.network. And from there, you can find all sorts of links to interesting places. Our developer documentation site is, we've put a lot of energy into that. We have a YouTube channel. Our Discord is where a lot of the actual technical discussions happen. So I would encourage folks to look there. And we have a very active ambassador program too, if you're interested in getting involved with the project.
Awesome. Some very good stuff. And for everyone watching, please hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And you can check out previous episodes of Staking Mondays available on YouTube and Spotify. For Mirko and Derek, I'm Ken. As always, happy staking.